So, thesis, antithesis, and I now give you synthesis. This is Matt Ridley. Viscount, I had no idea. Matt Ridley. I'm so pleased to meet you in person. I've tried for several years to get you to this conference. We had you by Skype last year and the year before, and this year in person thanks to Leah Costello. Is she here? Leah, I appreciate you doing this. This is Viscount Matt Ridley.
Thank you. Thank you, Moses, very much indeed. And as I say, it's wonderful to be here in person, because a couple of years ago I was here on the screen, but I was miles away. And it's great to be in person. And what I said then was that the world had got much better as a result of the human habit of exchange and specialization, which had led to extraordinary rising living standards that had amazed me when I looked into the data. But, as we heard from Edward, and to some extent from Christopher, the world is still a vale of tears. There's awful things still happening. Wonderful as it is, it's not as wonderful as it could be. So the question I want to put to you today is, can we, at the end of this century, bequeath to our great-great-grandchildren a world that is environmentally as well as economically better off? Can we make the world much, much richer and much, much greener? And I think the answer is yes. Let's just remind ourselves what's happening. The world is getting richer all the time. You thought there was a great recession? Well, there was in some countries, but in the world, hardly at all. It was a blip in the graph as far as the world was concerned. 2009, the world economy fell by 0.9%. It rose by 5% the year after that. So living standards are marching up all around the world. And it's not just the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting less poor. The number of people living on $1.25 a day may be 0 by the year 2028, which is still a horribly low level of poverty, but it's wonderful to think that we're making unprecedented progress against it. And actually, environmentally, things are getting better too. Because although we hear about extreme weather, the number of people killed by droughts, floods, and storms has been going down dramatically. It's 98% down, the death rate from droughts, floods, and storms, compared with what it was in the 1920s. Now, that's not because weather's got less dangerous. That's because we've got better homes and better communication and better transport and better technologies. And indeed, of course, we've got trade, so that when a drought hits one part of the world, it doesn't cause a famine because you can trade food from another part of the world. And as Christopher Monckton just said, he showed you this chart. I thought this was a very striking chart when I saw it in Nature a few months ago. There is no evidence that droughts are getting worse at the moment. If anything, there seems to be a slight decline in the amount of drought in the world. So the problem is, in that sense, is not getting worse, but we're coping with it much better because of technology. What might happen, then, in the century before us? Well, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change asked the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, to produce some scenarios for what might happen to the world economy in the 21st century. And they came up with 5, the most pessimistic of which was that people would be 3 times as rich per capita in today's money at the end of the century as they are today. That the average income on the planet would be about that of today's America in 2100. The most optimistic was that people would be 20 times as well off, that they would be earning in today's money about $170,000 a year on average. And it's worth looking at the middle scenario of these, the one that they described as muddling through. This is a world in which economic growth does not keep up the pace that it's been keeping up in the last few years. It doesn't go at 3.5% a year globally. It goes at just 1 or 2%, in which innovation is disappointing, in which trade doesn't flourish as much as we'd like, in which all sorts of things don't quite go according to plan. And yet, run the numbers, and people end up 8 times as rich as they are today by the end of this century. So there's extraordinary possibilities for wealth. Is it possible to have this kind of wealth and not hit some kind of ecological catastrophe? Am I, in preaching that this is what's going to happen, am I like the man who falls out of a skyscraper and as he passes the second story he shouts, "So far so good"? Well, many of the environmental problems we face are actually proving to be getting a little bit easier. population is still growing, but it's growing slower and slower every year. The population growth rate has halved in my lifetime, from more than 2% in the 1960s to just about 1% today. The number of people added to the world population has now been going down for 20 years. And if this continues, then the population will stabilize in the second half of the 20th century, somewhere around 10 billion. And that means that the population which quadrupled in the 20th century won't even have doubled in the 21st century. So coping with the extra number of people should get easier, not harder, because there's fewer extra people every year. And yet, despite the doubling of the population in my lifetime, the amount of food available per head all around the world continues to go up. People have more food despite there being more of us. How are we pulling off that trick? What is it that enables it to do that? And of course, the answer is technology. The answer is fertilizer in particular. Synthetic fertilizer applied to land enables us to produce more food from less land. This is the data on corn in America, decoupling in the middle of the century from the amount of land that was used to grow it. And of course, tractors, fertilizers, pesticides, these are the things that made this thing happen, and they're all dependent on fossil fuels. So let's not forget that fossil fuels have done things to help the environment as well as to hurt it. We are using so much less land to produce the same amount of food that if you run the averages of all the crops, as Jesse Orzabal and his colleagues at Rockefeller University have done, you find that we are using 65% less land to produce the same amount of food as we did 50 years ago. Now that's what saved the rainforest. If we had doubled the population in that time without increasing yields, we'd have needed far more land. We'd have needed an area the size of South America under the plow, extra. And so bang go the rainforests, bang grow most of the deserts and the thing. So the concentration, the sparing of land for nature by the fact that we've got more intensive, that we're getting more for less, that we're doing more production from less land. And this is a photograph of the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic in the island of Hispaniola. Haiti is brown, the Dominican Republic is green. Why? Because Haiti depends on wood, on charcoal, for nearly all of its energy. It uses charcoal not just in cooking, but also in industry. And as a result, it's almost completely deforested. It's relying on renewable energy almost entirely, and the result is ecological devastation compared with the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic imports fossil fuels to use and actually subsidizes the use of propane as a cooking fuel so that people will not go out into the forest and cut down trees to burn. So let's not forget that it's quite a good idea to get energy out of a small hole in the ground so that we don't have to pinch nature's lunch to provide us with our energy. Now, here's a statement that will probably surprise people. The richer we get, the more we're going to solve the climate change problem, the more we're going to cut carbon dioxide emissions. But it's not me saying that. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change itself. They say very clearly that the more we grow the world economy, the less warming we will have. Here's a chart from their report, their latest report, which came out towards the end of last year, and the blue line shows the scenario where we don't have a problem at all, where climate change ceases within the next few years and we end up with a temperature only 0.8 degrees higher than today. That's the problem-solved scenario. The other scenario is one in which climate change goes dangerous by the end of the century, so we're nearly 4 degrees warmer than we are today by the end of the century. What's the difference between those two scenarios? Well, here are the same two scenarios, plus a couple of others, in different colors, just to confuse you, on the chart. And the one with where the problem is solved is the one that shows the fastest economic growth. The one where GDP per capita ends up 16 times as high as it is today. And that's because the IPCC says if we do a lot of trade, if we do a lot of innovation, if we do a lot of economic growth, we will actually develop the technologies and the increasing economic efficiencies that will enable us to reduce our carbon footprint. Whereas the version of the world where we get dangerous warming is the one that produces only 3 times increase in GDP per capita by the end of the century. And that scenario, which is called RCP 8.5, it's worth looking at the assumptions behind it, because they're actually very odd. It's assuming, this scenario is assuming, that this is a world with 12 billion people by the end of this century. Well, that's nearly 2 billion people more than the UN projects. It's assuming that there is very little trade, and therefore each country is getting its energy from its own resources, from within its own country. And so there's very little specialization between country and very little efficiency. Sorry, I've gone forward. How do I get there? Yes, there. And it's assuming that we're getting 50% of our energy, our primary energy, from coal. Well, at the moment we get 30%. And although I come from Newcastle in the northeast of England, which is where coal started, and it would be wonderful if the coal industry got going again like that, because there'd be lots more jobs, but it's not going to happen. We're not going to increase coal use 10 times. So these are highly unlikely assumptions going into this scenario. And on top of that, it assumes that the sensitivity of the climate to carbon dioxide is roughly twice what the latest observational studies suggest. So the point is that you can get dangerous global warming predicted, but only if you make slightly unlikely, very unlikely assumptions about the trajectory of the world economy. That's the only one of their 4 scenarios that produces dangerous warming at the end of this century, because 2 degrees warming is the threshold at which everybody agrees that the problem is dangerous. And 3.5 degrees is produced by that scenario with those assumptions. But if you lower the sensitivity assumption to what the observational studies suggest, then even that scenario doesn't produce dangerous climate change. Or rather, it does by 0.1 degree. So it's actually, the IPCC is saying that it's pretty unlikely that we're going to get dangerous climate change. The only way we're going to do that is if we don't innovate, we don't trade, we don't expand our technologies. Meanwhile, something rather interesting is going on. The world is actually getting greener. I mean that quite literally. There are satellites measuring the greenness of the planet, and the data is called the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, and there are several teams analyzing this, and they're all agreeing that they are picking up a steady increase in the greenness of the planet. It's showing up in different parts of the world, but it's showing up in the Amazon, it's showing up in the Sahel region of Africa particularly, and it's going at the rate of 2 or 3% per decade. Here's another team in Australia who are looking at the same data, coming up with slightly different pattern of where it's happening, but they all agree that there is an increase in green vegetation on the planet of about 14% over the last 30 years. Now, why is this happening? Well, it's happening because of carbon dioxide in the air. That's what both teams that have studied this conclude, that because we've put extra carbon dioxide in the air, plants are able to grow a little bit faster. People who own greenhouses know this. They pump carbon dioxide in deliberately to greenhouses in order to make tomato plants grow faster. And experiments, both in the lab and in the field, have shown that if you increase the carbon dioxide over a field, the plants grow faster. Now, this is particularly going to be the case in dry regions because plants lose water when they're absorbing carbon dioxide. If there's more carbon dioxide in the air, they don't have to lose as much water, so they can grow more. And if you throw out those numbers to what's happening to our crops, if you calculate how much rice and wheat and maize and these other plants respond to extra carbon dioxide and calculate what we've done to the carbon dioxide levels of the last 30 years or so, then you can come up with a number for how much we've increased the total yield of our crops over the last 30 years. And it's an extraordinary number. It's in the trillions. If you take wheat, rice, and maize, the 3 big crops, which give us about 60% of our calories directly or indirectly, it comes to nearly $1 trillion of boosted yields as a result of these carbon dioxide, which again cuts down the amount of land that we have to plow to feed the world. But meanwhile, we are enacting policies to combat climate change that are doing more harm than good. The classic one is biofuels. We're taking 5% of the world's grain crop and turning it into motor fuel. Now, that's only reducing our use of oil by about 0.6%, so it's trivial, the effect on oil. But nonetheless, it's had a significant effect on food prices, and that has tipped people into malnutrition and even death. According to Indigo Kalani's calculations, we could be killing 200,000 people a year with this policy. And it's not even remotely plausible that it's reducing carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. And yet that's what's justified by it. So I'm here to suggest that I think it's well worth considering the possibility that we can get very, very rich towards the end of this century, and that actually if we do that, we're more likely to solve our environmental problems and to do what rich countries are doing at the moment anyway, which is to see forests coming back and wildlife coming back in a way that poor countries are not seeing, and to develop technologies that allow us to have a lighter footprint on the land so that we don't need to damage nature. Carbon dioxide levels are rising. That is our fault. It is industry that's doing that. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. There's no question about that. The climate has been warming, and I accept all of that. But what I don't accept is that it is certain that climate change is going to turn fast and dangerous in the future, or that renewable energy is the cheap and safe solution to that problem. Instead, I think that global warming is slow and mild, and renewable energy is proving to be expensive and damaging to the environment as well as the economy. In other words, the cure might be worse than the disease. We may be taking chemotherapy for a cold. Thank you.
When I first went in search of Matt Ridley, it was because I had sensed, in fact, I had seen that the marketplace for pessimism is considerably larger than the marketplace for optimism. And in this climate change discussion, you can see the two sides. I remember at the time that I was first introducing Matt by Skype, I said, "Do you want to write a bestseller? Just put out a book called The Coming Crash. Doesn't matter what's in it, it's sure to be a bestseller." It's in human nature, apparently, and we can see it in this debate. So it is particularly satisfying for me to be able to close the day and to close this little debate with a rational optimist. That's what Matt Ridley is. That's the name of his great book. And if I hadn't mentioned it yet, be sure to go up to the second floor, check out the bookstore, and take some of these books home. Matt, thank you so much for coming over.
Thank you, Matt.
Pictures.
Oh, this is great.